the truth as to what.
And, you know, there is nothing worse than trying to live what we have been given, put in front of us, this platter to say the American dream. Well, what is the American dream? All I can see is a lie. The American dream is a fraud. It's an illusion.
It's a great question. Can you go to court to stop a foreclosure in Georgia? You could try, but Georgia law says that you have to tender what you owe on your mortgage before you can get an injunction. And most of the judges will demand that at least you tender to the other side the arrearage amount. And folks can't do that. So going to court is very difficult in Georgia. We have the fastest foreclosure system in the country.
When you ride in the neighborhoods, you see, you know, every maybe fourth to fifth house. I mean, it's a number of properties that are just vacant, and you know that they're foreclosures. So what are they going to do with all these foreclosures? You know, it's a Ponzi scheme. They get us in these 30-year mortgages. They have us pay something 3 to 4 times, but they'll tell us they want $150,000 for something, and they'll come out here and sell it for $50,000. Now, what sense does that make? Why is it that they'd rather take something from somebody else and give it to somebody else for dirt cheap? Is that the American dream? Is that what we bought into?
It's very difficult to stop a foreclosure. That's what I do every month. I'm stopping a foreclosure.
And part 2 of that.
And it's hard.
Part 2,
and we're lawyers.
Part
Yes.
2, if they do file bankruptcy.
A bankruptcy stops a foreclosure.
For how, not long.
Yes, the trouble with Georgia is people rush to bankruptcy court because they can't stop a foreclosure in state court. And so if you ever go down to those Chapter 13 hearings, they're out in the hallway with people trying to save their homes. And Chapter 13 is generally not a big help because you have to pay the current mortgage payments plus extra money on the arrearage to the trustee. So if you're in a predatory loan you can't possibly afford, how are you going to go into bankruptcy? So people do it anyway, and they stop the foreclosure, and as you say, the company files a motion to lift stay, and they get it, and then they re-foreclose. And then we have people who file 3 and 4 bankruptcy. It's so sad to see how the government and our elected officials don't respond to this crisis. But Chapter 13 can help in some cases, so don't let me, we do Chapter 13s too, so I don't want to say they're all bad. You need to consult with a lawyer if you have a
At that time I had contacted at least a dozen attorneys and could not get one single attorney to talk to me, and his response was, well, you got them to talk to you, just didn't like what they said. And I think I came that far away from being slapped with contempt of court. Because no, that's not what I said. I called them, I did the talking. What I got from them was, and this is a quote in most situations, can't help you. And the most help I got in other situations was, well, here's the name of an attorney you can call. Ain't no guarantee they can help you, but he's
we know all too well.
Yeah, basically it's, I can't help you.
We know all too well.
Now I understand why. Because Georgia law says, which is the foundation for all of this, the rights of the creditors shall be favored by the courts. And every effort will be made to protect them from being defrauded. That is official Georgia code. That's a quote. That's not, well, this is what I think it's about.
Be foreclosed on and evicted once you're 4 or 5 payments behind. You can be foreclosed on and evicted in less than 2 months. And it's not judicial. They don't, if it were Florida, New York, more than half the states, way more than half, have judicial foreclosures, meaning to get foreclosed on, the lender has to sue you. And you have 30 days to answer. You can file an answer and go to court and have a jury trial. If you know, they don't do that here. You waive all your rights when you sign the papers.
I went to jail about a house, and I spent 102 days in the Fulton County jail for actually protesting about my house. They actually trespassed upon my property, and that is correct. The mortgage companies, the attorneys actually came to my properties, brought marshals there when they had no right to do that. So I am continuing to protest because they were trespassers, and I have a right to protest in reference to my property.
Okay. They moved you out of the house altogether and physically and confiscated the property?
I had SWAT team. I had helicopters all over my property. I had the City of Roswell Police Department. I had the Fulton County Police Department. I had all these law enforcement officers with big guns that came to my property as trespassers to remove me from my property.
You meaning just you, or you have family involved in this as well? Children, a husband?
I'm single.
No children? And this is all because of default? I don't know. I'm trying to...
It's an illegal foreclosure. What they're doing out here on these courthouse steps is illegal. They start off having people sign their rights away.
Yes, is this legal, what takes place on the first Tuesday of every month on the courthouse step? Is that legal?
That's a great question. You should go to law school. We've been asking that question for years. We are seriously considering filing a lawsuit to stop the Georgia foreclosure system. It's very complicated. Here's what, I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but everybody signs a contract to get a loan. And in that contract, here's what you do. You say, I know, of course you don't know what's in there, I don't know what was in my loan either, but it's all in black and white. It says, I know that I have a constitutional right to have a hearing before they take my house.
That's right.
And, or words to that effect. And I'm waiving it. I'm waiving my rights to have a hearing, and I'm agreeing to a private foreclosure system. So what Georgia has in place right now is all they have to do is 3 or 4 things. They have to run an ad once a week for 4 weeks in a row in the Champion, it's the newspaper they use in DeKalb. And that's what's listed in that packet I sent out. That's some guy alphabetized all those ads and made a fortune selling them in alphabetical order in all these counties. But anyway, they have to send you a certified letter 15 days or more before the foreclosure sale date telling you you're being foreclosed on. This law moves it back to 30 days that we got passed. But anyway, 15 days, you get a warning. Then the foreclosure sale is on the first Tuesday of the next month. Have any of y'all been up in the courthouse steps in Decatur on the first Tuesday?
On the first Tuesday of every month in Atlanta, Georgia, on the Fulton County Supreme Courthouse steps, foreclosed property is sold at auction. The auctioneers are speaking in such low tones that you wonder if it's by design. You may have to adjust the volume to hear the transactions going on outside this courthouse.
775. That's secured by safety. Has been, is hereby declared because of among other possible events of default. Definitely default is certainly made for the purpose of saying that all expenses of the sale.
Going once, going twice. Going back to the winner for $125,800. It's made $45,050. Do I have any offers going once? That is real forced.
Well, I have just witnessed a lending company engaged in a civil act of theft, trying to sell a property in my name that they sold to themselves, and it's just time to go to war. Not this particular incident, but another incident. The attorney who was auctioning off another property asked me to sign my name as a witness, which I didn't do because he witness to what? A sale. I didn't see a sale. What sale? Well, the lender just bought it back, but the lender's not here. I didn't see him do that. What I actually witnessed was an attorney on behalf of a mortgage company stealing property from someone else. One of the problems in America is that somebody else probably doesn't even know that they've just been robbed. You know, they're just going by business as usual because that's the way America does business. But it's time to take the state of Georgia to task especially for the failure of due process, which Black's Law Dictionary defines as notice and hearing. But since there has been no hearing, other than to almost be able to hear somebody whispering out on the courthouse steps, and that was not necessarily euphemistically. As a matter of fact, I've only heard one of them out here who was above a volume loud enough to hear. But this is essentially, in my opinion, where the United States of America, where the state of Georgia is headed. If we're going to have anything for ourselves, to defend ourselves, we need to do something about this process.
Why is it that come out here and read these foreclosures out on the courthouse steps? Why isn't it that they can't do the business up there in courthouse? Because they know it's fraud. Then when I'm out here in the rain, I'm out and protesting, you know, and people are standing out here, and then they start asking questions. Well, you know, why are we out here on the courthouse steps, and why can't we be in the building? Because they know that they have defrauded the people.
Knocking off the property on the courthouse steps. By the way, that's as close as they get to the court. I mean, the judge may walk by on his way to lunch, but he ain't looking at that transaction. That's sad that a judge isn't looking at how somebody's losing their home. But anyway, then it takes, they file a dispossessory warrant after the title passes. Whoever bids in, usually it's the holder, sometimes it's an investor. But they file a dispossessory, and anybody who knows about those, landlord-tenant dispossessory, you have 7 days to answer. The hearing is 7 days later. You need to go to the hearing, and the judge gives you 7 days to move. He calls up all the foreclosures at one time. And so it's less than 2 months, you're out.
Read this. You see, you have a right to defend your property. My case was in the district federal courts. I did a federal removal. Most people aren't supposed to know how to do federal removals. There was a federal removal. And the lower courts moved when they had no authority. If you look at this one document here, just read this one document here. That'll tell you that they had no right to be on my property. This is what came out in my trial.
You got something like this. I can see.
Sure. And this is what I'm saying. They've been trying to cover this thing up. But they know that a void order is void. It's void. It's never good. So, with this void order in place, they have a problem.
I'm gonna fight.
Because they never should have been on my property to begin with.
I'm gonna fight.
Now, should the attorney or the judge that day have done the right thing? But then what happened with my situation is now we have a civil situation and we have a criminal situation. They pushed me into the criminal courts. But they didn't expect all of this to come out like this. They were trying to keep all of this close and tight-lipped. They didn't want this to come out. But they have a problem because I was in the district federal courts and that was a higher court than in Judge Levinson's court, which is the magistrate court. So Judge Levinson granted a default order when he had no right because he was in the lower court, and you can't do anything over and above a higher court, which is district federal courts of Georgia. So this whole thing has been a flawed process.
Well, a point of confusion here. You keep using the word can't. You can't do this, they can't do that, but they're doing it.
That's right. And
how do you address that?
This is why I'm out here. This is why if you don't get justice in the courthouse, then you bring it out here on the street, and we continue to expose them.
Yes.
Because I am saying they can't do that, but I understand that they're doing it. So that's why when people say what's legal and illegal, well, let's define what's legal and illegal. Let's define what's right and let's define what's wrong. What took place in there was illegal and wrong. But have they done anything to rectify the situation? They would just hope that I would go away, but I won't go away. So I told them, if they don't want to do right in there, then I'll bring my fight out here to the street. Why am I going to keep going up into a courthouse when I see that I'm not getting justice? But what I continue to do is make noise out here. And you can rest assured I get more and more people that call me up, that when they go up in there, they come out here and they say, oh boy, is your name ringing up in there. My photo has been posted at entrances, the security entrances up there. They want to be known when I come up into the building. They all know me up in there. So, you know, sometimes you just have to keep your voice out there. Sometimes you may not get something done right away about your situation, but if you keep making noise, and now there's more and more people coming out here. Before long, this whole street may be, you know, engulfed with people. And the thing is let me just say this one thing, because if people really understood the truth about what's going on with these foreclosures, I would guarantee you everybody will be in the streets fussing and making noise.
I'm here with Zaza International. We just came down here to gather some information. We didn't know that there was any picketing protest going on here. First of all, we'd like to know, what is your objective here? What are you trying to accomplish with the...
Okay, this is the Move of God ministry. Okay. And we're shining the light on Georgia. Okay. In every county throughout Georgia, on the first Tuesday, the law makes it possible for them to come on the courthouse step. In every county step on the first Tuesday in each month to foreclose on folk property. So we shine the light that Georgia's going to have to change its rules. It's going to have to change the system. We're not against investors coming out here making money. We want them to make money because American is a capitalistic society, and that's the American way. But there ought to be a system in place where everybody can come to the table and the person don't lose their home.
Okay. Their argument is this is their system. So my question is, what specific changes are you looking for?
The system is wrong. You know, I'm giving you the information. I'm giving you basic information that you can go and use. It's not us against them. I don't care what they say. It's their system. It's a bad system. Just like segregation. Before the people hit the streets in the civil rights movement, it was an evil system that separated black from white.
One of the questions that we came down here to ask, to find an answer to, is what is the specific rationalization that they use to strip people of their property? Now, granted, stripping people of their property might be a little harsh, but from some people's perspective, it's what's going on. And that's one of the questions we have to ask. However, we're also interested in finding out specifically who to ask that question.
Let me give you an example. We had a case where a veteran of this country fought in several wars. He became ill and could not make his mortgage payment. His family stepped in to make his mortgage payment. He tried to contact the mortgage company, but the mortgage company would not contact him. So therefore, the mortgage company foreclosed on his property. And the property ended up in the eviction court in the magistrate's court of Fulton County. And when it ended up, the judge and everybody sitting there was sensed there was something going on between the judge and the prosecutor. And the family stepped there and said, Your Honor, we want to pay off the note. We want to pay off the note. And we made every attempt to pay off the note. But the mortgage company wouldn't get, and you know what the judge told that family? Y'all need to get an attorney. And they did.
If they do have enough income, we try to restructure the loan. And we do basically loan modifications with legal threats. That's how we can, in many cases, do more than your average housing counselor, and there are many good ones out there. There's a great one on Rainbow Drive, Chapman Walsh in DeKalb County is fabulous. I don't know if you know him, but I can't think of his church. He works at a CDC at a big church on Rainbow Drive, and they do a great job. And what they do without a legal claim is try to restructure a mortgage to keep someone in the house through the loss mitigation program. We use legal claims. We write what I call H-bomb letters. We say, you know that you did this, you did this, you did this, and here's our legal claims, and we're going to sue you. And then we often put a loss mid package in just to prove that our clients didn't have the income that was falsified. And so it's in the loss mid department. We send our legal letter, and we get good settlements for people. And here's what we do. Lower the balance. Well, we've done everything on a spectrum. The best deals we ever got was cancel the mortgage and get money, $10,000 or $20,000. We don't do that very often. And sometimes it's really bad. We get the mortgage knocked way down. But usually there's a fairly substantial reduction Lower the interest, lower the balance, lower the payments, re-amortize out for the rest of the term of the loan, and keep the people in the home with a loan they can afford.
You know, I have an appeal out there because now I'm a convicted felon about a house. I have 2 felonies upon me about a house.
Okay, what is your felony specifically?
When they came to my house, they said I had a gun. There was no gun. Then they came back and said, well, maybe what we should have done was said there was not enough evidence to prosecute. They said I had a gun in the commission of a felony. They said 2 counts of obstruction of law enforcement officer and 2 counts of terroristic threats is what I was charged with. So I was found guilty on 2 counts of terroristic threats. I'm sorry, not terroristic threats. Pardon me. 2 counts of obstruction of law enforcement officers, what I was found guilty of. So I have 2 felonies upon me. And I want the world to know that I became a convicted felon about a house because I knew my rights. I knew my rights, and I did have every right to tell them to leave per the Constitution. Most people don't know their rights per the Constitution.
Which Constitution are you talking about? The United States Constitution or the Constitution of Georgia?
Well, under both of them. That's correct.
The subprimes purposely used adjustable rates, interest only, and option arms, which are where you get to pick a payment. Everybody picks the lowest because they wanted to make those loans that they knew the people couldn't afford look like they could afford it. You wonder why we have all those crazy loan products? Because it makes it look like you can afford it when you can't. Our clients can't even afford the teaser rate. But anyway, then they use no doc, low doc, and stated income. They're saying, here they're telling the world, we don't care what the income is. That's what you do when you have borrowers who you know can't pay. You do, option arm, interest only, where you pay only interest for 5 years, and make it look affordable when it's really not. And then you underwriting, you say, we're not going to check your income, just tell us what it is. Well, but by the way, they call those liars loans. Our clients don't lie. I got to tell you this. Our clients are not lying to anybody. The mortgage broker is lying. Because I open up the application, I say, Miss Jones, it says you're working as a truck dispatcher. She's 82 years old. You're working as a truck dispatcher, and you're making $45,000 a year. And here's what they all say. I didn't tell them that. I brought them my Social Security letter. Oh my goodness.
Volunteers are always welcome. We need as much help as we can. We bring a lot of school children out, come out and work in the fields. We've had students come from as far away as Western Kentucky State. Some farmers have come up from Louisiana. People come.
Everyone here had some way, shape, and form of contributing financially to this event today, correct? And if you haven't, you're going to, right? Okay, so if you ain't do it through the donations that were passed around, you did it through the sponsorship of food, vendors, things of that nature.
Because it's about the resources, y'all. And the first thing I have to do is take the layers off of your mind so that you would not have a problem with having lots of money. I don't think y'all heard me.
Corporate. That's what you're looking at, because the corporations are where they make their money. So they're not going to go up against these corporations. This is what we're dealing with.
I wish I had good news to tell you all. I was just talking to this young lady over here, telling her how depressing it is to see what's going on in our country and how a group of people that I pretty much have been studying since 1991 I have viewed them then and now as a bunch of criminals and thugs that are taking people's homes. That's right. That's what it is. And the young lady asked, how can this be happening? That's a great question. Yeah. And I'll go through this stuff with you, but I just read, you know, I read the business news constantly, which is now front page news. And I read these articles when I'm eating breakfast, so I can't either eat my breakfast or I'm eating too much because I'm so shocked at what I'm reading. I'll just tell you a quick story that just amazed me that was in the paper Wednesday and Thursday in the New York Times, which is that the Bush Justice Department has a program that if you're a corporate criminal, and these are the big corporations, and many of those are the biggest criminals in terms of doing terrible things and violating serious criminal laws and committing felonies under the U.S. criminal code. They have a program in the Bush Justice Department that's been going on for years that if a giant corporation has committed a major felony, that they don't prosecute them and give them a jury trial where the corporation can be found guilty and the officers can go to prison. What they do is a deferment program where if the corporation agrees to change its ways and not do that again, they will defer criminal prosecution while our prisons are filled with poor people. These corporate guys, as long as they agree to be monitored by a monitor or somebody who's going to see what they're doing and track them for the next few years, they will be not criminally prosecuted and the charges will be dropped. Now, that's only part of the story. Guess who has been hired as the monitor in so many of these cases? John Ashcroft, Attorney General, has been paid $35 million to monitor these corporations, his old pals, and he and these other law firms are making a fortune doing this monitoring. Now that's only the second part of the story. The third part of the story is that, as I mentioned about these criminal thugs that do these horrible things to homeowners, the editorial in the New York Times on Thursday said that the biggest round of corporate criminal prosecutions is about to start because of the subprime mortgage meltdown, because not only have the homeowners been defrauded and deceived and put in a position of losing their homes, the investors who bought these securities, many of them have been deceived as well. And not only have they been deceived, but we're not worried about them, we're worried about the homeowners, but please understand that. But not only are the investors being deceived, these giant, people's pension funds have these securities in them. They're being wiped out. Cities, this is happening around the world, as you know. Banks in Europe and in two cities in Norway are going bankrupt because they bought these securities. The state of Florida has a special investment fund that is run by the governor and the lieutenant governor and the attorney general. They invested, it's investment funds for cities and school districts and counties to borrow money on a short term out of this investment fund that's a state fund run by the government. That fund is going bankrupt because it invested in the securities, and cities and school districts in Florida have lost the money they put into it. And there's one city, I forget the name of it, that may have to go bankrupt in Florida because they put their $300 million in short term into this state investment fund and they can't get it back. There's been a run on the fund by you get the idea that these people that put these deals together are walking away. I'll just give you one example. New Century is one of the worst predatory lenders that ever came down the pike, and three guys founded it, and they went bankrupt a little over a year ago when this thing started collapsing, and they're being investigated for criminal prosecution by the FBI and the U.S. Justice Department. I have no doubt that they're guilty and that they put this deal together to swindle people. And the way they swindle people, basically, investors and homeowners, is they fill these, and I'll get into this a little more, these mortgage-backed security pools, which are the basis of this whole collapse. They put 5,000 loans into a pool and use those as security to use those as collateral to issue investments, securities to investors. And those pools are filled with mortgage loans that are supposed to have income coming in every month, 5,000 loans in a pool. And guess what? They made loans to people who can't pay the payments. And that's the heart and soul of what's going on. And so these three guys did this. They knew what they were doing. They told their mortgage brokers around the country, bring us these loans, bring them in, bring them in. And they ran out of financially eligible homeowners and home buyers, so they did the loans anyway. And that's resulting in the foreclosure crisis. But those three guys are being investigated right now. And the New York Times said in this editorial the other day, Thursday, that they'll probably end up going into that monitoring system. And so not only is this a huge tragedy for the country, but in terms of accountability and making the wrongdoers pay for what they did and having them go to the penitentiary instead of having, somebody who gets caught with a small bag of marijuana going to the penitentiary for 10 years, they're going to let these guys off the hook. And so the jails will not be filled in prisons with those people if this plays out. They'll be filled with mostly the low-income folks who are always, the U.S. has more people in jail and prison than any other country in the world. But not these guys.
Not them.
They're going to get
unconstitutional, and we are putting our moves on this illegal situation, and we are not going away. And there are people coming together all over the country, all over the nation, to do battle with this illegal situation that is going on. This is illegal and unconstitutional. These foreclosures, you better ask somebody if you want to know the truth. You better ask me. I'll tell you about it.
Take off on their yachts, and they're going to have their 5 homes all over the world. They're worth tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. And this lady was asking me, aren't you upset by this? I sure am. I'm very upset. I'm depressed. I've been looking at this stuff since like 1991. And I'm sorry to get off the track, but yes, there's a tremendous sense of moral outrage about what's going on here and how it's affecting our communities and how, believe me, they're going to struggle, these people, to make sure they're not held accountable. And I could, spend the rest of the day telling you about this. Alan Greenspan, for example, the former head of the Federal Reserve Board, he allowed this to go on. He knew that they were making loans to people who could not pay. We told him this. I was at a conference where he spoke back in 2001, and they told him that these predatory lenders were stealing people's homes. And he says in his books and in his articles, he listened and he heard and he understood what was going on. But he thinks that the free market will fix it. That the involvement of the government is not necessary. That, that these bad actors, people won't buy their products. Won't buy their products. They did more loans than in the history of the world. And they're still doing them, and we're still paying for them. So there was a law that was enacted in 1994. One of our clients went to Congress to testify, called the Homeownership and Equity Protection Act. It was the first law nationwide to stop this subprime predatory mortgage lending. And the Congress passed it, and it had some fairly strong provisions. It had actually very strong provisions, but it addressed the high cost. They thought in those days that the super expensive, high-cost subprime loans, the ones that are 14% on up, where it was the area where all the bad things were going on. So they said if your loan is above this trigger, this interest trigger, you can't do all these things. So the lenders just went down below the trigger and kept right on doing it. But Congress gave Alan Greenspan and the Federal Reserve Board, administrative authority to enact regulations very broadly under this law to stop those bad practices. So they could lower the triggers. By the way, it only addressed subprime mortgage lenders who are the high-cost mortgage lenders. And that law gave Greenspan the authority to make that law applicable to all mortgage companies and for these abusive practices, to stop these abusive practices. He did nothing. He lowered the triggers one time, a small amount, and they just came back in under that amount and kept right on going. So I can tell you this, if you want the rogues gallery of who's guilty here, Alan Greenspan is at the top of the list because he administered a law that could have stopped these practices, and he refused to do it. And now he's backpedaling. You know, he's written a book. The Wall Street Journal had a front page article, I think Tuesday, saying he's on the hot seat now, and he says, well, it's not my fault. You know, he does this double talk, economic talk. Have you ever heard him speak? Nobody can understand a word he's saying. I understand this. They're swindling homeowners, stealing their homes. Foreclosures are through the roof. And Mr. Chairman, you did nothing to stop it, and you could have. You had a tool, and you refused to use it.
Foreclosures, and there are those who are taking their properties back because they are learning the remedies that the courts have not taught people. You don't learn this stuff in grade school, you don't learn it in high school, and they sure don't give it to you in college because they don't want you to know the truth about really what is going on. But we are educating people so that they can know the truth. There is a truth. There is a truth. Give people the remedies. They don't want you to know the remedies because they want to take advantage of people, the greed that goes on. That's right. There is only one source of money that is gold and silver. That is the true way to pay a debt. Under HJR 192, that is the remedy given for the people that they don't want you to know. These foreclosures are illegal and unconstitutional. And this is a mugshot. I gave up at the hands of Judge Wendy L. Shoup 102 days of my freedom taken away from me, my liberty taken away from me. I have a right to protest about what is taking place. They couldn't hold me. They couldn't contain me because I know the law and I understand the law, and they had to let me go. They had to let me go. What, Judge Levinson? You are under investigation. That's right. You are under investigation. Judge Louis Levinson, you are under investigation. This thing is not going to go away. It will, because they are the real criminals trying to put me in jail to say that I'm a criminal because I have the gall. Because I have the gall to come out here and speak the truth. That's what
you address the issue of those people who say that what Bernadette Allen talks about is nothing but this conspiracy theory stuff.
Well, they want that information to be a conspiracy because they would like to keep their system in place. They don't want their system taken out of place because it's the system that they put into place. So if too many people start knowing certain things, you know, and let me just say this, because I was put into the psych ward. They put me in the psych ward for 7 days while I was in the Fulton County Jail. They said that I was very manipulative. And I'm like, well, who's manipulative here, them or me? You know, because I choose to speak out about what's truly going on. Sure, they want to try to make everybody who speaks the truth. But anytime somebody speaks the truth, they're going to try to belittle you. They're going to try to make you look like a madman or mad woman, try to squash you down and brainwash everybody else so that they won't get on board with you. And that's what we deal with.
The question is, what is it? Well, you hear subprime, and what does it all mean? There's all kinds of mortgages, but two big categorizations, general categorizations, are prime and subprime. And those words have to do, and a lot of folks don't understand this, I didn't understand it until they explained it. By the way, the industry invented this word, the words, not us. But prime were people with very good credit scores, perfect credit. Subprime were people with less than perfect or poor credit scores. And, you know, it's very interesting to me because, I'll just say this in a couple of sentences, how the minority community, African Americans, have been treated in the housing market in the history of this country is absolutely outrageous. After World War II, well, first of all, during the Depression, Roosevelt made FHA loans available, which saved a lot of people's homes and made it easier for a lot of people to buy homes. Actually, he set up a program to save homes. That was different. But he created the FHA program for people with slightly less than perfect credit to get into homes, but it wasn't accessible by African Americans. And then after World War II, those veterans who risked their lives in the war came back and said, we should be getting FHA loans, and they got them. So that there was a huge burgeoning of home ownership in the African American communities in big cities around the country using FHA and VA to buy homes, and that was very good. I mean, Atlanta, but when I started in '68, I worked out at Perry Homes neighborhood, Hollywood Road and Perry Boulevard, and there was a huge amount of owner-occupied homeownership out there in those days. And we used to see bad second mortgages, but it was white folks coming from Buckhead and up north. They wouldn't come into that community any other way, but they came to steal. And they came in and did second mortgages and did a few foreclosures and were ripping people off, which we thought was terrible in those days. But now we have the biggest banks in the country doing it, but like Citigroup. but anyway, there was this solid homeownership core going on. And then to fast forward a little bit, back in the late 80s, I was with Senator Ford, Vincent Ford. We were involved in the Georgia Housing Coalition trying to see why banks weren't making homebuyer loans to African Americans who had very good credit to buy houses. They weren't doing it. Nowhere in the country could an African American get a bank loan, you know, from CNS Bank or Trust Company. So we filed a complaint against Trust Company Bank, which is now SunTrust, the Georgia Housing Coalition in, I think, '87. And with the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, they held a hearing, ruled against us, said the banks were not doing anything wrong. But a reporter at the Atlanta Constitution named Bill Dedman got a hold of our research material. There was a great professor at Georgia Tech that helped with the research that showed that all the mortgage loans in the African American communities were VA and FHA, not one bank mortgage. All the good bank mortgages were up in the white neighborhoods all over Atlanta. And he wrote a series called The Color of Money. You may remember that. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It caused a furor around the country, congressional hearings. The Justice Department sued Decatur Federal for race discrimination, settled for like $10 million. And they had to change their ways, and they did. And so the banks started doing homebuyer loans for qualified minority folks, African Americans, and that was a big watershed. But then, that was the late 80s, then came the subprimes, who started up with fleet finance in the early 90s, and the subprimes purposely, intentionally targeted their toxic, poisonous products to the African American and other minority communities. And so now, place, really, for home buyers and refinancers in the African American communities, they've displaced the good loans, the good FHA, VA, and bank loans. And now, you know, the numbers are staggering. It's like 70% of the mortgages in African American neighborhoods are subprime, the worst kinds of loans. And those same banks that weren't making the home buyer loans in the early days were funding the subprime guys to go into those, and they own those companies. So, you know,
this system that is in place needs to come clean. It needs to come clean, because we need to be a part of what they put together. I think this thing needs to come back to the table, and there needs to be a whole different system put into place as to how properties are purchased, and for people to have the true remedies of what is really going on. You know, if there should be some sort of default, or if you're saying that they defaulted, but you can't talk about people defaulting if you've done something wrong to begin with. If you've done something wrong to them to begin with, then you can't come back and say, well, they defaulted when you've sold them a lie. So who's right and who's wrong? We've got a real problem here. You can't take something from somebody else that you lied to them about to begin with. So I can't be involved in lies. I don't want to be a part of lies. And this is what this is all about. This whole setup that they have here that is called the mortgage arena, which I call the banksters, is a lie.
Is Alan Greenspan going to do anything in his whole career to do anything about subprime lending when he has statutory authority to do it? Let's talk about his successor, Bernanke. Who has he stepped forward to help? Bear Stearns, who is at the heart and soul. They bought more, created more, and bought more subprime loans than anybody. And guess what? They own these securities that are issued off of these bad subprime loans that are not performing. And the U.S. government, through Ben Bernanke, agreed to take over ownership of $35 billion worth of those subprime securities that we think are probably worthless in order to allow Bear Stearns to survive and to allow that investment banking system to thrive and to keep going that has created all this havoc. And of course their argument is always, this just kills me. That's what he's done for the country. He's helped save the financial system. They've done nothing. The lady asked me, what are they doing to help the homeowners? And here's my answer, nothing. Not one thing so far. And ask us, because I've got the homeowners in my files who are losing their homes. There's no federal program out there that helps them. I'll tell you that right now. There was one program that would have helped, and that's the one they kicked out as fast as they could. And you've read about it, I'm sure, and that's to allow bankruptcy judges in Chapter 13 to modify mortgage loans. And the most important thing, because one of the worst abuses we see is these appraisers purposely, at the request of the lenders and the whole system, over-appraising the houses. Why do they want to do that?
More money.
Bigger loans. The more the loans, the more the fees, the more they make money. Do they care what happens? Do they care about the foreclosures? No. So they've paid off the appraisers. I've talked to some very good appraisers. One guy showed up at a HUD conference on this at Atlanta Life Building. We had a big conference last summer, and he said, I'm a decent man, and I don't want to swindle people, but I have kids in school, and I want to put them through college, and every single mortgage company I deal with in Atlanta, Georgia, says I got to do falsified appraisals, or I'm blacklisted. And so the houses are overappraised. What a calamity, because what does that mean for the homeowner? You can't sell, you can't refinance. Here's something you can do, go into foreclosure and lose your home.
Well, there's a darkness right here today. Even though there was a darkness back there, there's still a darkness here today. They have kept us in the dark, and there are some of us that are awakening to the truth as to what's going on, but the numbers are still not where I would like to see them. So that's why we continue to come out here and continue to protest to try to educate people and give out information. So our numbers are increasing, and there are other groups out here, and our numbers are increasing. So this is all we can do. Who wants to be a part of something, to purchase something, only to find that you're out on the street? I mean, who wants to live like that?
How do you makes it a matter of opinion?
So you're saying that you've lost your property in an office like this? Well, would you like to talk with us on camera?
I most certainly would. I don't know that if you'd be interested in hearing what I have to say.
Well, I mean, just
I'm very concerned about the news media waiting until now to really look at this as a coverable news story. Okay, but things are what they are. At any rate, what I was getting ready to say was I wouldn't participate in this because I know from first-hand experience that in order, for example, for a first-time home buyer to buy their home here, it's dependent upon someone else's misery. Someone has to have become a victim through this. And when I say victim, in my case in particular, and I can't speak for everybody's cases, I was a victim of fraud. It's plain and simple. By one of the largest banks in the industry. A bank, Fremont Investment and Loan, and you can beat that out if you want to, but headquartered in California, who was so bad, I kind of called it borderline criminal. Apparently the FDIC didn't agree with that, and they closed them down because they were criminal. And I called them borderline because I figured there must be something about what they were doing that was legal. And as I was reading up and studying the law, because I could not get an attorney to speak with me, I had to study it up myself, found out basically everything they're doing is legal. Why? Because they wrote the laws in support of themselves, and especially to make the victims look like they're at fault, and they're not.
So you're saying what happened in your case is what I was trying to get a gist of, because different people's stories as far as predatory lending is concerned, they vary greatly.
I was issued a loan that the lending institution knew that I could not afford. When I talked to them on the phone, They told me that my income was not the issue. What was that? It was not criteria that they used to determine the amount of the loan.
Okay, so what was? I'll start over on that.
My income was not the criteria that was used to determine the amount of the loan. What they used as a criteria to determine the amount of the loan was the maximum amount allowable by law. That's what I was told over the phone. I couldn't carry that telephone conversation any further because I wasn't recording it. But it created a real problem for me. And everything went spiraling downhill from then. When I discovered that they were more interested in foreclosing than to get their money, and I didn't understand that at the time. Since that time, I've lost my employment, I've lost my house, I've lost just about everything. I am living under a roof by the good graces of a friend. It's as simple as that. And I want to do everything I can to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, the powers that be really get too much benefit out of this. Now, when I say the powers that be, I think when we dig deeply enough and we find out what's going on with the overall economy and not just the housing mortgage situations, you'll discover that the main cause of this entire thing is, number one, the Federal Reserve, which is not a government agency, and number two, Congress, which allows the Federal Reserve to exist. I believe that this is not going to be resolved until the Federal Reserve does not exist anymore. Unfortunately, I believe that the only way that that's going to happen is a revolution in this country. I think that George Bush is pushing this country toward war against itself, which I don't particularly care for, but the handwriting is on the wall. The Federal Reserve is the ones who are benefiting from this, and ironically, the loudest voice calling for reform in predatory lending laws is coming from the Federal Reserve. Go figure.
Okay, so as far as you being here, have you already lost your property?
Yes.
Okay, so are you here as a form of silent protest, or are you just observing exactly? Because if you hadn't seen me walking around with the microphone, I would have never known that you were someone who didn't agree with the process.
I am here with a colleague doing a documentary on predatory lending. Okay, so I don't necessarily call that silent protest. I have a couple of questions. I'm curious to know how you came across this information originally, and what kind of life were you leading prior to that?
Well, I guess some people, hi there, how are you? Some people thought that I lived a real decent life. I mean, some said I lived better than the average person. Not that I've tried to live better than anybody, but you know, I've gotten out here and I've worked per what is called the so-called American dream. The house that I lived in, everything in my subdivision was $500,000 up. I lived in a gated community, but I've worked, and so I would say that I guess I lived pretty good, considering what is supposed to be the American dream, to have a home and, you know, to work for something.
But when you say you were living pretty good, does that mean that you were pretty much going to work, coming home, enjoying the lifestyle that you thought was the American dream?
You know, there's still a huge population coming into Atlanta that needs homes. What's happening in Atlanta with this huge increase in the values of homes is that people who are hard-working people who make this city work in the service world, like policemen and firemen and teachers and administrative assistants, all the folks that make the whole structure work really well can't afford to buy a house in Atlanta. You have to be almost wealthy to buy a house because of this huge increase, partly brought on by this. And so if it comes down, one good part of it will be that folks can afford to buy houses more easily.
I'm a tailor by trade. I was operating what came to be known as the Sanyika House, which was kind of like a haven for African-centered thought and activity. And it came to be taken away from me. And that's basic my background. I didn't know anything about any of this until I was actually victimized by it. Before having gone into default, calling the mortgage company to be informed that, and this is way in advance, to be informed that no, their interest was going through foreclosure. I said, well, wait a minute, we're a little bit ahead of ourselves here, aren't we? Let's assume that what you're talking about is correct, that this system is just wrong. Let's assume that the people who are perpetrating this know that they're wrong. What would be your take on simply just walking up to them and asking them to voluntarily cease and desist, step down from whatever they classify as their position of authority, and turn the operation of this entire society over to the people who are being governed? What would your take on that be?
I feel that we, the people, we do give them the authority. And I feel it's going to take we, the people, in great numbers to be able to challenge just that. To get our government to do what is right by we, the people. And that's what I feel it's going to take. And I believe it's going to take some great people that come together to stand up to the forces and the illegalities that they have inflicted upon us.
This is Adelifu Sanyika with Zaza International.
I'm not interested in purchasing anything else, not under this system. This will not work because this is destroying lives. This is taking people's labor, their hard-earned labor.